Good morning, everybody, and welcome to ProWein AGORA. Emerging markets. They are often seen as the next growth engine for the wine industry. But growth is not always guaranteed. So in this session, we would like to look into these markets and ask where the real opportunities lie and which markets are worth to look into a bit closer. My name is Anja Zimmer. I'm a lawyer and wine journalist and co-founder of A2 Wine and Things, an agency for events, marketing, communication, and I curated this program for ProWein. So welcome to our new stage, our business conference at ProWein. So our first keynote takes us to Asia. Ian Anderson Ford looks at how wine markets across the region are evolving. He looks into markets like Thailand and Vietnam, which are very fast growing, but also at markets like Japan, South Korea, and China, with a little bit more of a changing dynamic. Ian Anderson Ford has been involved in building wine and spirits markets in Asia for 3 decades. He was educated in the US at Duke University and moved to China in the mid-90s. He then founded Summergate, a wine importer and distributor, later established the fine wine retailer Pudao Wines, and today he is founding partner of Nimbility and works with international brands who want to go to Asia. Unfortunately, he had an accident, so that is why we cannot have him here today, but he is here today via Zoom. Welcome, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Anya. It's a pleasure to be able to join you. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be there in person. So we have quite a weighty topic to get through in a short period of time. So I'm going to try to sort of barrel through this fairly quickly. We're going to touch primarily on 3 main markets. We'll talk a little bit about Asia generally, but we're going to look at primarily 3 main markets to give a representation of what is going on across the region. The region is very diverse and very complex. The differences between India, Malaysia, China, Korea, and Japan, for example, couldn't be more different. But there are some overarching trends. We're going to look a little bit more closely at China, Korea, and Thailand. And then we'll wrap it up and see if we have some time for questions at the end, which I believe, Anya, you're going to coordinate for me in my absence. So Asia overall, I wanted to make a few broad points. The first is just a reminder of something that is obvious and straightforward, but sometimes I think we need to keep in our mind when we think about what we're attempting to do as an industry in Asia generally and in each of these markets, and that is that wine is not indigenous in Asia. It's not an inherently local product that the citizenry here, the consumers here, grow up with, as we do in Europe and to a certain extent, certainly in Europe, as to a certain extent in North America, South America. And that's important to remember because the local beverage alcohol markets in all of these markets is quite significant. And I wanted to set that up as a frame because I think the path forward over the long run in Asia is more about imported wines participation in these markets relative to, for example, baijiu in China or shoju in Korea or sake in Japan. And when you look at where wine has come to now versus those other categories, and if you look at what the future could hold for wine alongside of those categories in a market like China, it's sort of staggering to understand the size and scope of what still is to come. So I wanted to set the broader frame up like that. As I think everyone is aware, there have been a lot of headwinds in the markets, economic conditions, currency, for example, in Japan, tariffs that have been quite volatile in the last year, government policies locally in China, in Thailand in particular, for example, and obviously a couple of wars that are affecting global commerce and costs and so on. The other point I would make is broadly, we're seeing a consumer landscape that's shifting. There's a transformation taking place with the next generation of wine consumers rising up in many of these markets. In China, for example, We're seeing a lot of shift towards different styles of wine. In some cases, aromatic white wines. I think many of us are already aware. There's been a surge in interest in New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc and German Riesling, and we're seeing that also in Korea. So I think a lot of that is working in the wine industry's favor. The era of trophy hunting and conspicuous consumption, I think, is diminished, and the era of personal preference and personal taste is on the rise. And I think in broad strokes that's good for everybody. Another area I wanted to point to is that we often look at import statistics in many of these markets. That given point one, that wine is not indigenous and these categories are quite small compared to the local beverage alcohol markets, there's a lot of volatility in import volumes that can be affected by various different factors: trade behavior, tariffs, surges in interest, or the headwinds that drive volumes down. And so you see a lot of movement. And I think it's not abnormal in young markets, emerging markets, that there's a lot of surge and then retraction and surge. So we see that in a lot of the import stats. So I just encourage everybody to keep that in mind. And broadly, the goal here in the long run, and I want to keep some attention on the long run picture, because the near term picture has not been very pretty. But in the long term, it's essential out here. It's such a fragmented area and part of the world. Pick your spots, pick your focus markets. Right. So that was a broad set of points I wanted to make just when we're thinking about Asia overall. So here's a look at the actual numbers. So this is shipments to the top markets in China, in volume in 9-liter cases on the left, and in value in the middle, and average prices on the right. So you can see the significant overweighted importance of Japan and China overall in the region as the two biggest beverage alcohol markets. Certainly they are for imported wine, with China coming in at 14.8 million, Japan 16.4 million 9-liter cases, so significantly outpacing the rest of the region. So those are the two bulwarks, those are the two cornerstones of the markets out here. If you look at Greater China overall, it's significantly larger than Japan in terms of volume, but areas like Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, they are different jurisdictions, different currencies, very different historical markets. So looking at Greater China isn't necessarily, from a market standpoint, going to be that informative. So in bold, you'll see China, Korea, and Thailand. Those are the three countries that I've earmarked for us to look at today. So China first. I'm going to try to speed through this in the interest of time. So here you see the big run-up of volume through 2017, up to 60 million 9-liter cases shipped to China. This is customs import statistics from the Customs Bureau of what's declared and imported into China. And obviously through the COVID years, you see decline. But it's not just COVID. And we came out of COVID with consumers whose confidence had dropped significantly. China consumer confidence went to an all-time low in about, well, it was mid to second half of 2022 after the severe lockdowns, and hasn't really recovered. And there are several other factors at play in the decline of shipments to China. This is not just structural. There are very real gaps in consumption that now exist from what we had pre-COVID. But we'll get into a little bit more detail of that. But you can see that the market is only about 1/3 of what it was pre-COVID. Having said that, there was an overheated market from 15 to 17. So the peak probably wasn't really 60 million. It probably was less than that. But that was a period where there was a lot of exuberance about imported wine, about Penfolds, and a lot of wine was being shipped into the market. So a bit about the landscape in China. I find it informative. I think it's not a complete direct parallel, but to think about China in a bit like the EU, where you have a big territory, you have an array of different languages. They're dialects, but really Sichuanese, Cantonese, and Shanghainese, neither of them understand each other. And so, they might as well be as different as two different languages. The written language is the same. but you have a broad, diverse array of cultures, of cuisine in the north, in the west, in the south. And you have a single regulatory environment and no internal differences in taxation, for example, like you have in India. And so it's interesting to think about China in that way, not just as one monolithic market, but as a patchwork of different markets around the regions. And I think that helps to understand, when you're tackling this very consequential market, how to approach it. The other important point here is to identify the total beverage alcohol market in China, which again is equal parts primarily baijiu, the local spirit distilled in China, and beer, and together with everything else, imported wine and spirits, and a few other bits and pieces, you have about 340 billion US dollar market in China for beverage alcohol. Imported wine clocks in at about 1.2 billion to 1.5 billion in value, at import value. At retail value, that's probably somewhere around 3.5 to 4 billion, maybe 4.5 billion. So, the imported wine sector in China today is plus or minus 1% of the total beverage alcohol category. So, despite a huge effort over the last 30 years and a big run up in volume into China, we are still playing with a very, very small piece of the pie. We're very, very small market share of the entire beverage alcohol market in China. So highlighting a few trends that we've seen in the last year or two. A lot of volatility in the market. The trade is very distressed and uncertain. It's very hard for them to forecast and predict demand and forecast demand and manage inventories accordingly. So there's been a lot of uncertainty and volatility. A lot of cash flow issues resulting from that. So there's a lot of instability in the trade, for all the reasons that I think everybody is aware of and I mentioned earlier. Very important to mention that in May of 2025, the government reintroduced and reinforced a prohibition on alcohol with government officials and government activities and events. Now, in China, that's a very, very big part of the economy, much more so than in Western countries. And it has had a chilling effect on that very large sector of the market, where government officials are very, very much afraid to be seen drinking or being around alcohol, even in public. And so that's impacted a significant sector of imported wine demand, primarily more on the sort of trophy wines, or the conspicuous consumption style of wines, the see and be seen wines, flashy classified growth Bordeaux, maybe Penfolds, where government in the past government banquets would be, uh, you'd see those wines very commonly there. So that was a big factor, and not to be underestimated in terms of its impact on total demand in the China market. There's the whole phenomenon of Australia went out of the market, came back into the market. It came back in strong, and I think there was a bit of overstocking in 2025. And I think we're seeing the reality strike that actually the market demand is not the same as it was prior to the effective tax ban on Australian wine. One very nice bright spot, and I think this is what I'll close with on China in a minute, is that we see a lot of younger consumers, the next generation of consumers coming into the wine category. They're excited about the sociability of wine, about wine bars, about the knowledge in wine. There's a lot of blind wine tasting competitions. Part of that is natural wine, but it's more, I think, just the diversity that wine offers to that segment of consumers. And very importantly, there is a very dynamic, just in the last say 4 or 5 years, maybe a bit more, a very dynamic and exciting domestic Chinese wine production at a premium level. So it used to be Great Wall Jiangyu Dynasty, big volume, low prices. Now we're seeing all kinds of really interesting wineries emerge, making smaller production, boutique wineries, and they're cool, and they're going to trade shows and t-shirts and tattoos and DJs and showing their wines, and it's really exciting a new generation of wine consumers, which I think is fantastic and very important. So there's the size and shape of the market. I'm not going to dwell too long on this in the interest of time, but there you see. I look at it more, not so much year to year. I see that the market has sort of stabilized at about 16.5 million to 17 million 9-liter cases in imports every year. I think in 2024, I misspoke earlier, it was 2024 where I think there was a bit of a surge of shipments of Australian wine into China, and that then impacted shipments in 2025. But I think we're running at about 16.5 to 17 million 9-liter cases now across all categories. So a bit about route to market in China. There are a few different ways you can go to China, and I'll speak very quickly to these. Direct to retail, so that's likes of Sam's Club or Walmart or Hema. The national importer model, which would historically be an ASC or an EMW, Summergate, etc. A multi-importer model, much more complicated, but trying to put together a patchwork of different importers that serve different parts, maybe channels, maybe geographies of the market. And then there's the self-import model where companies set up their own company, potentially in Shanghai or Shenzhen, and import directly and act as their own importer. So in general, this is very producer specific, but the recommendation is typically to look at a national importer unless you have feet on the ground in China and you can manage a multi-importer model. You need to have representation here to be able to stay on top of that and manage it and control it. And direct to retail is increasingly interesting, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a minute. So you have the national importers there. You see their logos on the right. Tough to penetrate, very big portfolios, sometimes constrained by the ability to build the kind of inventory that you need because of concerns about cash flow, particularly in recent years. Usually quite professional, good at reporting, good at sharing information in various different ways, good at strategizing the market. So a good, safe pair of hands. And I think for most producers, this is where you'd like to be. It's sometimes hard to get with these guys because their portfolios are quite full. And interestingly, in some instances, they are more accepting of a qualified multi-importer model where they import some wines and other wines from the same producer, but different wines are imported by somebody else. So that's a little bit of a softening of the strict exclusivity model that these importers usually employ. So direct to retail, this is pretty lively sector right now. Sam's Club, I think, is on everybody's mind at the moment. A lot of people are selling a lot of wine to Sam's Club. They go direct and they also buy domestically from importers. So it's a hybrid model. Similarly, Hema, which is Alibaba. These are the big bricks and mortar guys. Costco, Aldi has got a regional business. Obviously, their business is very, from a wine standpoint, quite narrow and focused. And then you have another category, either online or instant delivery, as we've laid it out here. And in particular, recently, the instant delivery category of business is exploding in China. The likes of JD.com are looking at the instant delivery model for their wine business as well because of how well it's doing. So these are an organization, for example, here on the screen, you see Weima, and then in parentheses, Meituan. Meituan is a food delivery company. And they have a massive logistics network all across China for rapid delivery, and they're folding wine into that, a specific wine business to deliver wine within 20 minutes to people who have ordered it. So you could be at a restaurant and order wine in 20 minutes. It'll be delivered to you at the restaurant. Ding Dong is another example of that. So some pretty exciting things happening from the direct to retail side of the business. One quick finish on China. The digital landscape is extremely important in terms of sales and in terms of influence. It is completely its own ecosystem, separate from the West. It is not Instagram, TikTok. There is TikTok, but the Chinese version called Douyin. No Facebook. Those are irrelevant largely in China unless you're trying to reach a very, very, very small group of people who have lived overseas or are expatriates. So you need to familiarize yourself, not only from a marketing standpoint, from a sales standpoint, with all of these platforms. And they're substantial and highly utilized. And I see a lot of the future of wine business in China is going to be going online through these sales platforms. From a regulatory standpoint, it's very open. So if you look at Australia or if you look at other, maybe even Korea, other parts of the world is heavily restricted. It's very lightly regulated. So a very, very important ecosystem to understand and figure out how you're going to get inside. I would close on China just saying I think the tide goes out and the tide comes back in, and I think the tide will come back in China. I think the total beverage alcohol market is so substantial, and we're just scratching the surface. Very, very small share of it today. Young consumers, this next generation of consumers, they're excited about wine, and everybody I talk to in the industry, if I asked them, was this next generation going to be drinking the same proportion of wine and spirits, imported wine and spirits, as the current drinking generation is? In other words, are they going to drink more or less Baijiu versus wine and imported spirits? Everybody says more wine and more imported spirits. So if we're pursuing a larger share of that $340 billion beverage alcohol market in China, the upside is massive in that sense. And the fact that these exciting Chinese wines are being produced, bringing in a whole new generation of wine drinkers and wine enthusiasts, as the emergence of great California producers did for the American wine industry years and years ago, I think that's also a big plus. Those three things combined, I think we need to keep our eye on the prize in China, and play it for the long run. Okay, I'm moving fast here, but we have two other countries to talk about. So very quickly on Korea, again, the shoju and beer market in Korea is roughly 84% of the total volume. So again, you see a preponderance of an indigenous beverage alcohol market, and we're coming in as an imported product, an imported culture, an imported brand, etc. And we're trying to build alongside of that. And the uh, the opportunity, however, again, similar with China, is significant, and the COVID period, interestingly, exposed some of that. So what you see here again is import stats into Korea in volume and value. There was a huge spike, as you can see, in 2021. Korea got very excited about wine during COVID. They were drinking a lot of it at home. It reframed the view of wine in Korea by and large, as a generalization, from something special occasion, fancy, luxury, imported, to something I might drink more regularly at home. And so we kind of got over this hurdle in Korea from once in a while, maybe at a Western restaurant, luxury occasion, to something maybe a bit more every day. So you had a big surge though in 2021 and 2022. Part of the issue there was, and then obviously volumes came down, but I'll explain that a bit. Part of that was a logistics issue. There was big organizations like Lotte and Shinsegae, the big chaebols in Korea that dominate retail. They were seeing demand increasing significantly, and so they started shipping big time. And they also were contending, if you can all remember, in 21 and 22, there were a lot of logistics delays around the world. So they were doubly worried about not having wine to sell to all of these Koreans who were looking to buy wine. So there was a lot of shipping into Korea. What I would point out is, if you look at 2019 to 2025, despite all of that inventory coming in and having to be run down through the following years, 2025 is still significantly greater than 2019. So net net, after all of that surge of shipping through COVID, we're still on the rise in Korea. So it's quite an exciting market. There's a lot of interesting consumption happening, a lot of new people entering the trade, not only at the retail level like wine bars, but also at the distribution level. There you see the numbers. So big increase into 2021, but even now we're seeing a bit of growth, 7.3% growth into 2025. So despite all of that inventory being absorbed into the market, we're still on the rise. And interesting to see that New Zealand is gone from 50,000 cases in 2019 to 643 cases in 2025. So a huge growth story, almost at this point, almost rivaling the French category in volume and having exceeded Italy. So it's an extraordinary story. And New Zealand is really having a moment in many places around the region, Korea included, also China. So again, a few notes. I think I'll have to kind of whip through these pretty quickly. There have been political headwinds specific to Korea. There was the presidential crisis not that long ago. But one of the things that we're also seeing is accessibility. So the convenience store chains, which are very powerful in Korea, GS25 is an example. They're really building out their wine selections and part of that was because of COVID. People wanted to be able to buy near their home and take it back home. It is significantly expanding accessibility to a much broader range of imported wines in a very convenient way all around the country, particularly in Seoul, and Seoul is the main market. And important to point out also that there is no e-commerce as we know it in Korea. So while there is a lot of online activity, you can see here the Koreans like to follow some of the key wine influencers online, but e-commerce is not legal in Korea. So you either have to be physically there when you buy it or when you pick it up. One of the steps you have to be physically present. So those CVS stores, the convenience store chains, have become really powerful and have made wine very accessible to interested Korean consumers. We talked about multiple routes to market for China. Our strong recommendation for Korea is you find a sole importer. It's still that sort of a model. Or potentially sell direct to retail, somebody like a Lotte or a Shinsegae. Exclusivity is important. It's really Seoul plus a couple of other smaller city markets, so it's quite compact. And you really want to have a partner there that's going to help you build your brand and build your distribution. You have large conglomerate importers, Lotte, Shinsegae, Haitjinro, which is the big shoju producer. They're all involved actively in importing wine and distributing wine. They're big companies. They're really big organizations. They dominate retail, supermarkets, and convenience store chains. Very, very challenging to work with in many ways because of the size and bureaucracy. Then you have medium-sized importers, Shindong being a good example. More wine specialists, good number of staff, really strong distribution, able to do both on and off trade, but more medium-sized and more specialist importers in that category. Then you have, depending on the type of wine that you make and the wine that you sell, there are quite a few very good, strong, more boutique-sized importers in Korea that are serving on-trade, hotel channel, restaurant channel, wine bars, and private clients. So there's a good stable of importers now in Korea to speak to and to find the right partner. Distribution downstream, I spoke about this a little bit already. I think, yeah, convenience is the big story. The hypermarkets, though, are also very active. E-Mart, Lotte Mart, and Costco. And then traditionally the department stores for more premium wines, for tasting promotions, gifting campaigns, and so on. As I said, e-commerce is not legal in Korea, so that's something that isn't available to us. But there are a lot of ways of promoting online, but the actual e-commerce transaction can't happen. Okay, I got a few minutes left. I'm just going to whip through Thailand. It's a much smaller market than Korea and China and Japan, but it's exciting in the sense that it's growing significantly organically, and a lot of that is being driven by deregulation. So the Thai government, which in the past was employing very high import duties and taxes on wine, has stripped all of those away. There's some volatility to that in the sense that some administrations, when the administration changes, things maybe go back and forth a little bit. There's also some rules about when during the day you can buy alcohol, when you can't. Those have been, by and large, those have been softened. So we're seeing exciting growth in Thailand. It's from a small base, but it is an exciting market to be active in. Yeah, so largely the beer is the largest category. There is a bit, but there's not much of a domestic spirits category. It's significant, but it's not as you would see in China or in Korea. Wine imports are growing, and I would point out that you have sort of the business community in the north, centered around Bangkok, and then you have the tourism industry in the south, Koh Samui and Phuket and so on. Very dynamic, very tourism-driven market in many ways. So it kind of think about it a little bit like Jakarta and Bali in Indonesia. It's a similar dynamic. You have the business community, entertaining, dining, banqueting, gifting, fancy restaurants. And you have the tourism sector in Phuket and the beach resorts and restaurants and tourism and all that. You can see there the imported wine category from 922,000 cases to 1.5 million in the span of about 5 or 6 years. So really, really substantial growth. And hopefully the deregulatory posture of the government will continue. One other interesting side note, they have recriminalized cannabis, marijuana in Thailand. So that in most people's view is going to lead to, again, a bit more of a resurgence of beverage alcohol versus cannabis. Yep, I'm going to skip through that. So look, it's not a huge market. So there are some very good professional importers there, different sizes and shapes. I think it's important to find one that fits your ambition, fits the kind of wine that you sell. There, like I said, there's a strong retail environment for imported wine in China. Tops, for example, is a great company. They employ a whole team of sommeliers. They have a range of different formats selling wine in Thailand. Fine wine attached to fine food, all the way down to a chain of supermarkets. Very, very strong company, very professional buyer. So there's a lot to be done there. There are a lot of good actors, good players in the category, and hopefully we're going to see a period of sustained growth in the Thai market over the years to come. Whew, okay.
So,
Anya.
thank you very much. I have to skip the Q&A session, I'm sorry, because we're a little bit over time. If someone has a really urgent question you want to ask, send me an email. I refer it to Ian, and maybe he answer you via email, but we can't do it right now. So thank you very much, and thank you for joining us from Shanghai.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Anya.
So, from this mixed signals from Asia, we are now coming to a completely different story. We are coming to Brazil. In traditional markets, wine consumption is sometimes going down. Brazil continues to move in the opposite direction and with a speed which is incredible. So in this keynote, we will look into the data behind the paradox, what is really driving Brazil's sustained growth, and what can producers do to be successful on this market. Our speaker is Christian Burgos. He is publisher and CEO of Inner Group, one of Brazil's leading communication agencies. He does a lot of things. I can't tell them all, otherwise we wouldn't come to your presentation. But he does a monthly magazine, Adega, and there is a television show with the same name he does as well. And he is founder, partner, and director of ProWein Sao Paulo. So, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure being here to talk about two passions that I have, wine and business. In this case, it's an honor to explain a little bit about the Brazilian market. We could talk for hours, but I will keep myself to a close time. So my idea is to provide a lot of information. I'm not going to explain all the graphics and things that you are going to see. If you want, you can take pictures or watch later on. I'll keep to the points directly, so we have some time for Q&As if you want. You know, this is a little bit of information about the growth of the market. I kept the numbers not in quantity, but in value, because we are talking about premierization, and we are going to talk about some sectors of the segments that are doing better than others. So nothing is better than to see that we, in the last 10 years, we almost double the size of the market. We have a 60.5% average growth rate yearly, and it keeps going on. our projection is that we are going to double again in the next 10 years. The reasons for that is that we are receiving a demographic bonus where people are getting into the age that they start drinking and purchasing and drinking wines in Brazil. And for the first time, we have two generations of consumers. Brazilian was, you could not import wines until 1996. So we are very young importer of wines. This is a huge graphic, but it's just for you to understand that we have a completely different market share by countries than you are used to see. So we have Chile as the leader, almost 40% of market share. Then Argentina, 18%. Portugal, 15%. French, 10%. Italy, 80.6. Spain, 5.6. And Uruguay, 1.4. Okay? It's interesting to see that our average growth in value was 6.3% and in volume 3.7. And some regions, countries, you are going to see that just boomed. If you look at French, we are going to explain a little bit what's happening. But for instance, white wines from French, Chablis, have a growth of over 50% last year. This is what is happening in the style of wine, in the category. So we were mainly, when I started in the business 20 years ago, we used to say wine is red, and that was it. But it's changing a lot. A lot of this because sparkling is the Brazilian industry. It's also, if you look at the sparkling numbers, you are going to see it booming of over 15% a year in the last 8 years. But 40% are from a particular sparkling wine, Moscatel, a sweet sparkling wine. And everybody that comes to me, they say, okay, so I need to join this market. I would say no. Yet, because we are very competitive in this. Maybe with the change in the Mercosur and European Community Agreement, you are going to have the opportunity to be more in there. But as you can see, everybody is telling all over the world that rosé is booming in Brazil. White wines are booming. It's gaining more and more and more market share, even though red wines never decreased. This is something that I would like you to see. This is quite interesting because this is what we are talking in volume. So you have last year 8% of the volume in what we call premium over $50 per 9 liters case, and super premium over $100 9 liters per case. But when you look at value, you see that this 8% responds for 29% of the total addressable market in Brazil right now. And I can tell you this, the low price, and it's the one category that goes like this in Brazil. There are years that they grow, that are years that they decrease. Chile is doing a very good job of catching this specific segment. They are nearby, but it may change also with the agreement with the European Community. But during the last 15 years, there's never been a year of decrease in the premium segment. So we keep growing in the segment. Does it mean that there is a space for everybody? No. But it means that if you are well established, you can benefit from this growth. For you to have an idea, we have 700 importers in Brazil. Last year, 706 active importers in Brazil. And as you can see, supermarket share in numbers have grown and decreased. This happens because of the interest rate change. At this moment, our annual interest rate was 3.5%. Right now, it's 15%. So it's very expensive to keep your inventory. And in Brazil, we have a crazy tax code, as you all know, and crazy legislation, as you all know. So what happens is that it's we need to pay all the taxes when the wine arrives, as if you were selling them. So you need to put a lot of upfront cash. And this makes the supermarket chains to decrease their participation. And again, we are coming back to a point where we are increasing the number of regular importers more than supermarkets. What doesn't mean that supermarkets is still the most important and powerful distribution channel for cheaper wines, as everywhere else in the world. But this is one thing that is interesting. Not everybody has every country in their portfolio. And here you can see that half of the importers doesn't have Chile, for instance, which is the market leader. We have only 270 importers of Portugal wines. We have 268 in Argentina. Italy, 246. You see that this is a huge increase. In the last 2 years, Italy have been growing in terms of importers. And when it happens, distribution spreads also. So we are going to see bigger numbers of Italian wines being sold. It's very interesting, important to note that we are talking about sell-in and not sell-out. So we need to take a consideration that it's a time frame between the movements and what actually happens in the market. Then Spain have been growing steadily, and Uruguay have been reaching 72. What is important to know is that we have a lot of concentration in this market. The third largest importers in Brazil respond for 68% of the total. So, and people used to say, oh, it's usually 30, 70. No, it's 5% of the importers correspond to 68% of the overall market. Huge concentration. These companies, 11 of these are supermarkets. The other ones are, 5 of these are companies that import to sell to supermarkets. And then you have the other half that are distributors that either sell in a multi-channel position. They have proprietary stores, e-commerce, on-trade, and off-trade nationally. But you have also specialized companies. There are companies that have a huge footprint in e-commerce. They are the ones that help the market to bring more and more people in the last 12 years up to 3 or 4 years ago, because they are also becoming multi-channel operations with their own stores and starting B2B channels of distribution and creating portfolios for this. So this is something that is happening. This is a message for people that is already in Brazil, because there is a huge pressure and a huge expectation that Brazil is going to solve all the problems of everybody. So producers are pushing hard over importers in there. Importers are responding to this, and partially the growth comes from this. But just for you to have in mind, we have just an exchange rate from 2018 to 2025, 53% increase in costs, just FOB costs. And if you go to the average price of a bottle, retailer, the price increased only 13%, which means that the distribution channel, importers and wine stores and this and that, they are being responsible for keeping the price lower than inflation. Okay, they are carrying the burden, and this. Why do I tell this for you? Because you need to look at the financial health of your prospect partner in Brazil. This is really very important. Here, you see how the market share by volume and value. We did this because we are focusing on, we do twice a year 2 seminars for the industry. We invite the leaders of the industry, 30 people, to discuss these numbers, what is happening, trends, what are the opportunities or problems that we may face together, and how are we going to deal with this. Many of them were very interested, of course, in terms of Mercosur, Union European agreement. So we said, this, right now, Europe, you see, managed to be 33% of the market with 66 from Latin American wines, or South American wines mostly, and 40% of the value with 60% for South American. We think that this is going to shift in the other way. We think that we are going to have 60% of European wines versus 40% of Latin American wines. Chile is going to be the most affected country as they have the largest base, but of course we did a chat like this on how could they manage to keep their share in a growing market. Okay, so everybody's moving. It's a shifting that is I hope it's going to benefit the consumer, and if it benefits the consumer, we are going to see an increase, a boost in consumption increase. So maybe we can double in a shorter time than 10 years from now. This is something that we never presented before. I use the data of Ideal BI. Ideal BI is a company that provides everything that I need. I say, oh, I need to know okay, what is the median price in this segment for Alentejo versus Vinhos Verdes and this kind of thing. So you see what happened in Alentejo is the first region. We had people in here that could be, we have Exporão, Nuno, commercial director of Exporão in here. He could be giving this lecture to you because he knows a lot about this market, and they have a huge responsibility on growing this participation of Alentejo in Brazil. But we have Vinho Verde. Vinho Verde is growing a lot because it's the cheapest white wine or more affordable white wine that we can have in Brazil, since Chile doesn't have a huge production of white wine, and Argentina doesn't have a huge production of affordable white wine. And Uruguay has a small production. So all the countries benefit. And apart from this, it's cheaper in logistical terms to send wine from Europe to Brazil than from South America to Brazil. Try to explain me why, I don't know. But that's true. So we have a burden of 27% in import tax in Brazil. This is going to be zero in 8 years for still wines, and zero in 12 years for sparkling. So, and the decrease starts right now. So people are positioning itself to understand what is going to happen, because competition advantages are going to change a lot in the next years. Then you see Burgundy, as I said, 64% increase in volume, 45% increase in value. And this is Chablis, mainly. It's incredible what is happening. Then you have all the other regions. And if you can see in these 15 principal regions, you reach 64% market share. We have concentration, but we have a lot of opportunity because people are very curious. And as you see, you have many importers that are already established with their portfolio, and they can manage to pick we call jewelry to enrich their portfolio, to bring new things to their consumers and to the on-trade, off-trade that they attend. Anya asked me to be very brief, but give what would be my fast ideas on how to reach Brazilian market. And here it goes. First of all, think long term. Brazil is not a winning lottery ticket. Everybody talks to me as if we are going to solve problems that are happening everywhere else. We are not going to do that. But if you think long term, we are part of the solution. Second, decide which distribution channel should drive your share in Brazil, and look for importers accordingly. Many people just go there and say, okay, the biggest premium importer and this, so I'll talk to them. You need to see, make a little bit more of homework in order to reach the market. Many people go there and just distribute cards and bottles and with no planning. Check if there is a gap for your wine in the portfolio of the top 3 importers. If not, move to the next 20. If not, move to the next 20. This is very, very important, not to lose your time and to actually catch the attention of your possible partner over there. Bring score from reputable wine critics. Gold medals from wine competition doesn't count, unless you are going to work with supermarket or flash sale importers. Importers really advance things when you have good scores from reputable critics. Okay. Otherwise, what most of the time they do, they bring wines, we taste the wines, we give the scores. This we do because as a magazine, we taste nowadays 4,500 wines a year. So we are doing this all the time. There is no we don't charge anything for this. It's part of our job. And they use this to say, okay, I like this wine, and this is going to have a good score, so maybe I can import the wines. Then bring your best FOB price, but do yourself a research. Bring with a solution, saying, okay, compared to your main competitors, where are you? Are you competitive? If you're not, don't lose your time. Okay. Then contact your possible importer and ask for a meeting at ProWein São Paulo. I need to do some, we are there in October. You should visit the show if you want to know a little bit more of the Brazilian market. If you are really intended in participating in the market, a good opportunity, come with your country group, and this is a good opportunity to, this is the place where you are going to meet everybody. We have over 2,000 wine brands in Brazil during ProWein, and we received 20,000 visitors in a 3-day show in the beginning of October. You are not going to be able to arrange a meeting during the trade show. Everybody's in there to sell. But you are going to have a look and feel of what is happening, and you can start a first approach. In the last day, the sommeliers and of the importers used to go around to taste different things that are in the show. But otherwise, you go there with your booklet, with your case, drop it with your bottle in the importers that you want to taste your wine and know a little bit more about you. Maybe you can start a conversation from there on. If you find your partner in the first 25 importers and the company is financially held, you may have a partner for life. Okay, Brazilians, we are very interesting people. In Brazil, as in many countries, but I think it extrapolates in Brazil, we do business among people, not among companies. So it's very useful to have in-person contact, and you need to have presence in Brazilian market to keep the flame burning. Okay. I have, oh no, I already, the other guy, he used Zoom because there is something that when my time just blew. Sorry. If it's beyond 7/5, either you and your partner are growing to grow together. I have seen many cases where this happening. You have a good partner, they grow based on your product, and then they acquire more products to the portfolio. Or you may have a good temporary relationship while building your brand in Brazil. Even more if you are a premium wine category. To build a brand and reputation, investment and presence are essential. Okay, so if you cannot afford time to go there and money to invest, don't spend your last ticket with us. Okay, it takes time to build things in Brazil. Avoid open relationship. You know, I knew that. Many people want to leapfrog grow faster with multiple importers. It doesn't work in there unless they operate with different brands and different regions and never cross border, so they never meet each other, which is very difficult to do in Brazil. All the above are go, no-go decisions. But if you label, say, Chablis, congratulations, keep all above. Simply choose your porter by the name you think is more beautiful. Send a bottle, your FOB price, and available stock. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This was inspiring, but a little bit of punishment was there is no questions.
Okay.
But he is at the side, and you can ask him any questions you want.
Thank you very much.
Because we have to continue now. And from a very hot country and market, we are now coming to a cooler country, but where the wine market is as hot as in Brazil. We talk about Poland. The wine markets are expanding in Eastern Europe as a whole, but Poland stands out with a 10% annual growth rate for the last years and room for more. So the drivers are clear. You have a young, very enthusiastic consumer base, and you have an economy which is really strong. So we brought you the one expert who can tell you what you have to know about the Polish market. Is Wojciech Bońkowski. He's a wine writer and author of 8 books. He's co-founder of Poland's leading wine media platform, and I don't know how to pronounce that, Wineries also. And he's a regional chair of the Cantor World Wine Award. And in 2023, he became Poland's first master of wine. So, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anya. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Hello. Thank you for dedicating some of your precious time today to our presentations. I'm here to tell you about Poland. Of course, Germany is neighbor, so sometimes you think you know all about it. But of course, there are many, many interesting surprises about the Polish market. I will be necessarily brief. It's always the privilege of the last speaker to have to squeeze. But just the key things about me, I'm primarily a writer and a taster, but I have also been specializing in the business of wine for over a decade now. I was a regular contributor to Meininger's Wine Business International while it existed. And now Poland is in the news. You might have been reading about the economic growth in Poland. We have had growth for 35 of the last 36 years, plus 4% last year, EU leaders. Poland is now the 20th largest economy in the world. This has also helped the graph that you see happen. And not only our wine market has very, very steadily grown since 1989 when we moved to a market economy, but what has also been really interesting is the growth in the average value of the wine. We are actually one of the most dynamically premiumizing markets in Europe and beyond. The average price, retail price of wine in Germany, I think sits at the moment around €2.50, if I'm not mistaken. Now Poland is 3 times more expensive, which is really quite crazy if you think about the fact that we earn about half of what Germans earn on average. So we have this enthusiastic wine public apparently ready to spend quite a bit of money on wine. And this is of course creating an opportunity not only in terms of sustainable growth in volumes, which is still happening, but especially in terms of value. And you can see that 60% in value in the last 6 or 7 years is really quite impressive if you compare to stagnating markets in Europe. Now, as a matter of fact, wine is having quite an uphill struggle in Poland. We are primarily a beer market, and also a market with a very strong position of spirits. So if you look at this graph, wine by value is only around 10% of the alcohol basket. Many countries actually have similar proportions, especially emerging markets, and we know that on the one hand, this is a big challenge because spirits and beer companies tend to be very powerful, okay? They are very consolidated. They work on much higher margins. They have amazing market penetration. Sometimes they're quite agile in adopting new trends, you know, developing new products. On the other hand, the thing that is going to be helping wine, certainly in the next decade or so, is the fact that beer and spirits are very saturated in Poland. We are now the second largest beer drinker nation in the world, only after Czechia. It's physically impossible to drink much more beer than we do at the moment, okay? 105 liters per capita. I mean, some people try, but I think statistically it's just not going to happen. Spirits have a hard time. I mean, vodka is also not going to increase. Spirits companies have been able to grow the whiskey category, for example, but we can already see that whiskey is sort of plateauing. So, you know, they try to push the next thing that is tequila at the moment in Poland, but you can only do that much. Whereas wine apparently still has a lot of room to grow and continue to grow. Now, the structure of our market is a bit similar to many other countries in Europe. I think the country that comes closest to what we are is probably Denmark. If you look at the modern channel altogether, this represents about 85% of the volume, okay? Of which 2 companies, Lidl and Biedronka, which is owned by the Portuguese Jerónimo Martins, they represent about 40 to 45%, depending on who you ask, by volume. Only 2 big players, okay? So this leaves a relatively small slice of the pie to the independent market, which is of course what we are all interested in, unless you are a volume producer. But this is definitely where the excitement is and where the growth is, and where I think most of the growth is going to be in the future, because of the premiumization phenomenon that I already showed you on one of the previous graphs. Who is driving the market? This has been very, very uneven. Countries like Italy have been able to really grow dynamically over the last few years, so the period before COVID, COVID and after COVID. This is like a big bump on the market everywhere in the world, including Poland. Now, COVID has not really slowed wine sales in Poland at all, on the contrary, but we have had 22% inflation recorded in 2022, and also the war in a neighboring country lovely Ukraine. So this has created a big shock on the market. But after this, we are back to growth. But countries that used to be very prominent on our market, especially Central Eastern European markets like Hungary, Bulgaria, Moldova, they are suffering quite a bit. Not only them though, Chile, for example, too. So you see that we are currently experiencing a reshuffling on the market. Okay, some things are happening. Now, I have developed this graph to show you this a little bit more precisely. Okay, the size of the bubble is actually the size of the category of a country's exports, and on the vertical axis you have growth or decrease. So we can see that, generally speaking, the big players have done pretty okay. Okay, they are sort of holding on to their market shares, but also there are some newcomers. Georgia, similarly also to other markets, have been growing crazily. I think they recorded 85% growth last year. Now, when I see plus 85, I always think, you know, okay, this must be some sort of circumstantial, accidental growth. It's impossible to increase by 85% organically, okay? This is not going to last for very long. But they are certainly there because I have been taking an aggregate of the last 5 years to show you this graph. Now, as I said, Eastern European countries, Central Eastern European countries not doing terribly well. Chile suffering too, I think a little bit sort of stuck in that low segment of the market, okay? Whereas you see some very small players that are doing quite well. I mean, I have my friends here, Aris Serpos from Greece, and Greece is actually becoming quite a sexy category in Poland. People are getting really interested in this sort of, you know, new origin, wines that they haven't heard about. The same with Austria, okay? Now, let's look at wines broken by category. Now you see that as a little bit like as everywhere else, red wine is stagnating. It used to be over 60% of the market, so very similar to Brazil that Christian was presenting a few minutes ago. Now red is still growing, but much lower. White is becoming really like one of the leading categories for growth, but especially sparkling. So if you see 142% in 5 years. Now that's quite impressive growth, and I think that is completely sustainable, and I think we also know why. Okay, we have a new demographic joining the wine consumption, younger women. We have a lot of new consumption situations appearing on the market, you know, without food, in bars, outdoors, seasonal drinking. We have Polish wine that is still a very small category, about 1.5% of our market, but you know, Polish wine is very often sparkling and people are excited about Polish bubbles. So you see that this is becoming really a very, very big trend. 0% is also growing very, very dynamically, but at the moment the base is still pretty small. Rosé as well, still a small category, but growing. So what we see is that sparkling white, rosé, whereas red, probably not going to grow all that much more. Now, what has happened on the sparkling wine market? This is really interesting. At the moment, we have over 60% of the sparkling wine sold in Poland is Prosecco. Okay, they have had some amazing growth, both DOC and DOCG, of course, to a smaller extent. And they have actually cannibalized the entire sparkling wine category, which before was much stronger with Cava. We had German, you know, inexpensive German sparkling wines. They have been completely eaten by Prosecco. But this graph is actually interesting because it shows that Prosecco has probably like reached maybe tipping point. I think it is still going to continue to grow, but forget about plus 50% per year that they've been experiencing before. But look at Champagne. Now they are getting the steam, okay? So what does that mean? That means that many consumers who have entered the wine category via Prosecco, okay, because it was relatively affordable and it was fashionable and you could find it in places where you go and drink. Now some of them, you know, maybe 10% of that cohort is saying, okay, I'm going to try now this famous sparkling wine that is called Champagne from France, because apparently it's the older brother of the Prosecco, and some of them are staying. I'm not surprised, to be honest. So of course it's a much more expensive wine, but you see that we have a group of consumers that are really ready to trade up, and they are doing so. And so Champagne is actually looking quite exciting, given that they can't sell their wine anywhere else. I think they're now going to want to sell it in Poland. So, look, why exactly are some countries successful on our market? I think it's always a combination of factors, okay? Italy and France, they're sexy, everybody knows them, they have massive penetration on the market, they have this super positive quality image, they also have a lot of diversity, okay? So when they lose steam, maybe with Chianti, red wine, suddenly there is Pinot Grigio that can sort of take it over from there, and so Italy continues to grow. Portugal is lucky because the number one player on the market is a Portuguese supermarket chain. So of course, you know, 30–40% of the wine that is there on the shelves for people to buy is coming from Portugal. That has to help, okay? And of course, as a country, they have a strong USP in being very competitively priced, you know, very good value for money, also a diversity of styles. Georgia, you know, interesting. They have managed to create a story that the world was ready to believe, okay, about this sort of artisanal, slightly wild, you know, wine country. We all know it's not really true. We all know that 90% of wine in Georgia is actually, you know, industrial wine made by big wineries, but somehow the image sticks, and so people are sort of intrigued by this category. We see a lot of sustained marketing efforts from some countries that are present in Poland. They have their own agencies, like Wines of Germany, Wines of Portugal. They do a lot of events, and this is usually fueling growth. I see countries that are not present at all, and I don't have very high hopes for them. You know, if you're not doing anything, it's going to be very difficult to assert yourself. One maybe exception is France. They are very lazy in Poland. They don't do much, but somehow they can sort of still organically grow. But otherwise, I think if you are from a sort of wine exporting country, you definitely should be doing something, you know. And I see some countries taking note of that. Czechia, for example, was not very present, but now, since 2 or 3 years, they've starting, you know, delivering the message about the wines. Look, we are your neighbor. We have some exciting wines. Why don't you come and taste? And I think they will be going from that little corner that you were seeing on the graph there. They're going to be sort of going upwards and also rightwards as their sales grow. Now, yeah, I have tried to sort of analyze exactly, you know, why some wines are successful and some not. And I think, you know, Mediterranean origins, Western Europe, is definitely having some sex appeal to Polish consumers. They are losing interest in the traditional strong exporters from Eastern Europe that have a slightly obsolete image. You know, it's your daddy's wine, the semi-sweet red from Moldova. I'm sorry to be saying this, I mean, I like Moldova. They have also a lot of really interesting, innovative wines, but it's hard for them to get out of the box that they have occupied for a long time, okay? They have to be slightly more creative with the marketing and find a way of like saying, hey, let's have a new conversation, but it's not always very easy. So for example, it's easier for Greece or maybe Croatia to start on the market because it's a completely new thing than, for example, for Bulgaria, because they have been around for a very long time. Yeah, look, sparkling wines, I told you, I think if you push with the marketing, it's always going to have a positive impact. I can't overstate the importance of actually doing something on the market on a national and regional level. Otherwise, it's going to be really very, very hard. Politics, you know, some people said maybe Hungary has been slightly penalized by what's been going on since the war, and, you know, many people don't really like what the Hungarian government is doing. I've actually researched this. I've done a survey of this on the market. I think it has a little bit of impact, maybe not so very much. But it's interesting how low price, for example, is not really sort of helping you very much on the market. It's not so easy to really grow if you are selling a wine at 1.2 or 1.5. You know, this category is doing okay. You can move quite a bit of volume with Biedronka and Lidl. But the real fun is with the premium wines. I can't believe how much really expensive wine is moving on the market. I get price lists from importers, €100 wholesale price for a bottle of champagne or Burgundy, and sold out. You know, I can't even get a bottle. So I don't know who's drinking that stuff, but when I go to the really good restaurants, and we have now an amazing restaurant scene in Warsaw and elsewhere, Michelin will extend their coverage to the whole of Poland as of this year. We have several Michelin star restaurants now in Poland. It's full of people, and they are drinking expensive wine. Expensive bottles of wine are on the table. Nobody's doing the low and no pairing, I can tell you. Okay, so a little recap. we have had this big growth, and this growth is going to continue. We have new consumers getting on the market. We have a strong economy. People have money. People are interested in wine. Wine is a sexy, fashionable category. Almost half of our population now drink wine at least occasionally. This is a jump from 15% in like 10 years. So in 10 years, we have tripled the amount of people who drink wine in Poland. So of course they'll continue to drink wine. I think once you start, you don't stop. This is an important truth about the wine market anywhere, and especially in Poland. And we are now seeing a more decentralized growth. Okay, Poland is 38 million people, 30 million adult consumers, but only 5% of the population lives in Warsaw. We are a bit like Germany, but very much unlike other countries in Europe. Okay, we're very decentralized, and we're going to see more and more growth in regions. We have seen this amazing premiumization trend, and again, I think it's going to continue. You know, even if maybe people stop spending all that much on pleasure, sometimes they do. There's economic uncertainty, but I think once you've started drinking the champagne, it's going to be rather hard for you to go back to the sort of €5 sparkling wine from before. Okay, we've spoken about the domination of the discounters, but otherwise we have a very competitive market. A bit like Brazil, it was funny, also 700 importers. Now Brazil is, I think, 5 times the size of Poland by population. A little bit bigger market, but we see that we have this, you know, big fragmentation. So you always need to find the sort of right-sized partner for you as a company when you export. You know, get that right. And I think all of those new market niches are going to be really exciting in the future for everybody to consider. My email if you have questions, but I think we have a few minutes for Q&A. Anya, how have I done?
Yes, hi. We have time for 2 questions because
Great.
we are really running late. So is there something you really have to ask here on stage? Otherwise, there's always a chance to talk at the side. Is there something? Yeah, there is something. But please, a short answer because we are running out of
Wojciech,
time.
thank you. What is the biggest risk for the Polish market now?
Well, we have a legislation risk because at the moment there is a big debate in Parliament to cut down on alcohol, a little bit like in other countries like France. So maybe online sales are going to be prohibited. I mean, I don't think it's going to go through, but this is a potential risk. And I would say that this legislative uncertainty is probably what is hindering growth at the moment.
One more, but that's the last one. Sorry, I have to be strict.
What is the demographics of the consumption? Is it more urban areas or is it spread out everywhere in Poland?
It was concentrated in what we call the tier 1 cities, okay, above 200,000. Now I think it is decentralizing a little bit. The amazing thing is that the majority of the wine consumption, and especially the interest, is in the 25 to 45 years category. So this is why I'm also very optimistic about our market, because we have a big consumer base that is there to stay.
So, thank you very much. It's great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was inspiring. It is great to see that there are markets with potential of growth.